Yeah. Well, just tell us now. I mean, we're sat here at Wigan. You're the chairman, Chris. How did you become... Obviously, Wigan owner Ian Lennigan was selling the club to Mike Danson and stepping out of the limelight, so to speak. So Mike bought the club and presumably came to you or rang you up or something and said, Chris, would you like to be the chairman?
Well, some extraordinary scenes, really. So this is my 18th year with the Wigan Warriors, and I suppose I've seen quite a bit. And I'd for many years worked as the chief doctor of the team, yet we were really developing other doctors as well to help and support. And Angela now is one person who's come through in that way, and she's now our chief doctor. Anyway, I retired from the NHS. I'd done my 40 years, end of 2022, and Ian had said he would like me to spend a bit more time around the club and get more involved and perhaps use some of the knowledge I'd learned from the NHS and take things forward in a more meaningful way. So I thought that was a great thing. Anyway, he let me know that he was selling the club, as you say, Martyn. But what happened then was actually in this very room. So by then I'd become a director of the club, which didn't really mean very much, but I was. So we had a shareholders meeting, and Ian had said to me before the meeting, "Oh, Chris, I need to talk to you afterwards." I thought perhaps he wasn't very well or something, and he invited me in here. And actually, Jake, it was me that wasn't very well after it, because he was just there. Ian always speaks. He's very respectful, man. And he speaks in quite flowery language, and he said, "Well, I'm definitely selling the club, and all of this will be finished and transacted by the 1st of December." And he said, and I recommended to Mike Danson, the new owner, that you become chairman of the club. I went, "Me?" and he said, "Yes, Chris, you become the chairman of the club." And he said, and Mike agrees with this in principle. So I was completely shocked, and I do remember it all very well, because I'm very keen on the theatre. I was going to the theatre with my wife, and I was a bit late because of the shareholders meeting. And I said, when I met my wife at half time, I said, "You don't believe what Ian's just said to me." And so she said, "Well, what do you think about it?" I said, "Well, I'd never ever crossed my mind anything like that." And yet I had a decision to make, Martyn, because what I'd planned on doing was being involved with Wigan, but also taking forward in a more meaningful way my role as chief doctor of the game.
That's right, yes.
Particularly as I'd been heavily involved in a lot of the discussion and dialogue around the management of head injury and brain injury, and you know, a real piece of work there. And what had been planned was for me to spend more time doing that, development of doctors within the game, and with England Rugby League. So I had to make a decision. Am I going to turn left to become the chairman of Wigan and step away from those other things, or turn right and become more involved in the game? And so I decided, after a lot of deliberation, to turn left and be the chairman of Wigan. And I met Mike, Mike's a very humble man. He's rooted in Wigan. He was born in Wigan, and shares similar principles.
It's actually wonderful that Ian managed to find Mike, and you know that both of them come from Wigan.
Absolutely.
I mean, Ian. I actually had a bit of a falling out with Ian towards the latter part of his time at Wigan. But you can't deny that he has done some fantastic things for Wigan and created this environment that we're sitting in at the moment. And
without doubt, we would not be where we are
without
now
him,
without Ian.
And I think
his leadership.
Everybody should acknowledge that, in my view.
So his leadership over 16 years, and we made sure that was expressed very clearly, and there was the opportunity for a number of events to celebrate Ian's fantastic commitment, dynamism, and support and vision for this team and the town, which has got it to where it is today. So Ian said, when I spoke to him again about it, well, what have you decided to do? I said, right, I'm going to move forward around Wigan. And so he said, well, with immediate effect, then we're going to make an announcement, you're going to be the vice chairman. I said, oh, that's fine. So I had, every year I speak to the players, Jake, at the start of the season, and I'd explain to them, 2023, at the start of the season, look, I'll have a bit more time now. I'm no longer working in the NHS, I can spend a bit more time with you guys. And then I'm thinking, crikey, I'm going to have to tell them that I'm now going to become the vice chairman. They were all very pleased about that.
Yeah.
Now, I've said I'm a clumsy man, and you will know every time you speak, the set piece events around speaking in a sports club are always in the canteen. And so Matty says, Doc wants to speak to you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm falling over a chair and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, we managed to get it done, and the players are very pleased, and all of that sort of stuff. Then we get to sort of end of June, beginning of July, and it was clear that for Ian to have the send-off that we wanted to give him, for him to announce that he was going to cede the full ownership to Mike, so we could then have a 3-month celebration, quite rightly, of Ian and his achievements and him and his family being involved in a number of events. So there was an announcement then that was going to be made that I was going to become the chairman of the club, and the transaction was going to happen on the 1st of December. So on a Friday night, again, I have to speak to Matty to go, look, I need to speak to the players about this.
Yeah.
I need to tell them tomorrow. So Matty calls the players in on a Saturday morning. Jake, I got dogs abuse. He wants to talk to us again. Jay Field, what does he want? He's only spoken to us. What does he want now? And Bevan going, well, it's incredible. It's a Saturday and we're in here because the doc wants to talk to us again. Liam Marshall, well, that'll take us 3 hours because he's always, when he talks, he goes on for hours. We'll have to put back our lunch now because he's talking. Anyway, so I finally get up there to say, and I'll never forget it. Again, in the canteen, and trying to make sure I can see everybody. And I stand up and I realise that I can't quite see everybody. So I step back, didn't realise a chair behind me, so I sort of stumble again. No. So Liam on one side, Marshall is team joker, and Jay on the other side. They were just absolutely creasing with laughter. Martyn, it gets worse. On the 1st of December, Mike, new owner of the club, obviously wants to sort of meet everybody again in the canteen. I planned to say a few words to introduce him. Great. Would you know who Junior December is?
Oh gosh, yes.
What a
lovely kid, actually.
What? I mean, Junior is just a great lad, and we love his company,
and a potentially great player,
and wonderful what he's doing. So Junior had a knee injury at the end of last season. He had to have a bit of an operation. It's all sorted now, but he was on crutches at this time. So I was stood near Junior, stand up to introduce the new owner, and I collided with Junior's crutches this time. So Junior's go, oh, Doc, I'm really sorry, you're always helping me. And now I've left my crutches there. I said, Junior, it's me, not you. So, look, and so we've now got this new way of working.
I was going to ask about that, Chris, because you're the chairman, but you've got Chris Fridlinski. I think his title is managing director. CEO, not managing director.
He's a chief executive.
So he's obviously a full-time chief executive.
He is.
Your role as chairman, I assume that's not full-time, is it?
No, it's not.
No.
And it's what. So the description is as a non-executive chairman. So the executive are involved in the day-to-day running of the club. Non-executive chairman, so chair the board, make sure that there's a clearly defined strategy for the club, probably be the public face of the club, and make sure that strategy that's decided by the board is then effectively communicated to everybody. So the three things around that, and it's really important that everybody understands where we are as a board. So number one, to be the most deeply connected elite sporting club with the community. That's absolutely central to everything, and to use that as a vehicle to improve health and well-being. And so Mike, our owner, is passionate about that. That's number one for our board. Number two is for our club and the area here, so the stadium, Robin Park Arena, Oral, as we develop that, to be places where everybody feels welcome, places where everybody feels proud, to have those connections with the past, to celebrate the past, to look forward to the future, and everybody feeling really welcome and at home in our environment. So that's number two. And number three is, of course, for our team to be successful, yet to be successful playing the Wigan way. So with panache, with flair, with dynamism. And that's the case, for that to be the case for all of our teams, LDRL, PDRL, Academy, Scholarship, first grade men's and first grade women's. And that, if we win along the way, great. But to play that Wigan way is really important to us. So they're the three big things for us.
How much time do you spend a week then on Wigan matters then, Chris?
Well,
as a non-executive director,
some weeks it might be every day, Martyn. To be honest, others. So it's a minimum of a couple of days.
Well, I always find it's funny because when you talk about a non-executive director, you assume there won't be that much time, maybe a couple of days a month. But these roles normally end up being far more demanding than you might anticipate, and I'm sure this one is probably.
Yeah. So as I say, probably it's a minimum of 3 days a week, to be honest. And yet one I'm really enjoying, and also I enjoy the dialogue around the wider aspects of the game as well, and supporting Chris. So Chris runs the club. He's the chief executive, and my job to be a listening and sounding board for him, and to help and support him, but also those other functions. So there's a bit as well as there's a chairman about governance and making sure we do the right thing. But those tasks in the wider part of the game, Chris is he's enormously respected. And perhaps to use some of my experience in leadership in the NHS for bringing the game together collectively and to express some of the things we've spoken about, about what a wonderful game that we have, what a fantastic product we have.
And that's what I'd like to move on to now, Chris, because, I don't think there's any doubt that Wigan is the biggest club in the game. In, whatever criteria you use to measure, the size and quality of a club, I think Wigan comes at the top. St Helens obviously would be obviously up there as well, and Leeds should be, but this year not doing quite as well. But what about the health of the game? One of our frustrations is that I've been involved for so many years now with League Express and running our company and so on, but the game never seems to grow that much bigger, and yet it's got all these qualities that we've talked about, and it should be a shoe-in, really, to attract more people. We've still got some clubs in Super League getting average crowds of less than 5,000. Why is it so difficult for our game to expand and generate more interest than it currently has?
So I think there's something about us collectively talking the game up and having a consistent message. So you saw me, Martyn, get a bit passionate about those three strategic things around the Wigan Warriors, and the board has agreed those. And I keep saying the same three things every time. So perhaps for the game, collectively, all aspects of the game, to agree on three things, and to absolutely make sure that they're front and central of every part of every conversation. So I know something that the Rugby Football League are really interested in, and I referenced it, is the social value of the game. Now, that massive connection between our game, our very proud game, our courageous game, and the fans and the towns that the game is rooted in. I think that's a really compelling piece, and a piece whereby it's part of the fabric of these towns. And are we describing and articulating that as well as we should do? We know it happens, yet collectively as a game, are we absolutely making capital of that? And I think we could do better in that regard. And I know colleagues at the Rugby Football League, I know Sir Lindsay Hoyle thinks the same way, and there's a groundswell now around that social value of rugby league that we need to capitalise on. Now, you mentioned crowds. Look, my understanding is within the Super League, all of the teams except for our good friends at Warrington, the crowds are on the up. And also, factually speaking, viewership on Sky, something that Sky pay a lot of attention to. It was 600,000 people. It's now well over 1 million people. I know there's more games on, yet my cup's always half full. So I sense there is much more optimistic vibes around the game. Yet we just need to capture this, to bottle it, to channel it, and then to drive things forward. But that has to be in a collective way.
Are you a supporter of IMG and what they've brought to the game, Chris?
So IMG have done a really good job around the standards. And why I say that is that I mentioned Michael about the standards in the team and how important that was. Within my work in the NHS, how important standards are and those being reliably delivered. And so the work there, I think, around grading has been very important. I think we all together need to work with IMG around the further work about reimagining the game.
Yes, that's right.
That's the place. So I said to you earlier, let's come back to Great Britain. There's an example, isn't it, of an iconic brand. So how can we use the power of IMG, for instance, to really generate a sense of excitement around an iconic brand, to then bring the two games together a bit more from the Southern Hemisphere and here? Because a lot of this conversation, Jay, was about Australia against Great Britain. I mean, I was only the doctor. I mean, how proud I was. These games, sell-out games. There's newspaper cuttings on my wall about them.
Yes.
And so, the bit about reimagining the game, I think that's a place that everybody will be united around.
The trouble is, different people
over that
reimagine in different ways, don't they? There's no collective agreement, I think, on how the game might be reimagined.
So I think that those are the conversations that are now starting to happen, and it's important, my view, that the leaders of the game act in that collective way and use the opportunities of some of these green shoots that we can see, how that can be taken forward.
Absolutely.
And the grading has meant that those standards, everyone's had to up their game, Martyn. We all have to meet those criteria, and that gives a decent base, isn't it?
One of the problems, I'm a bit conscious of how much time we've been here, but one of the problems with our sport is that there's a very small number of teams that can actually win things when it all boils down to it. Probably no more than 3 or 4, if we're really honest about it. And obviously, Wigan is one club that can and does win trophies regularly. But I always wonder, Chris, whether there's a danger. I always remember from 1988 to 1995, Wigan won the Challenge Cup every year and were the champions in most of those years.
Sure.
And the crowds eventually got bored with that, to be honest. You as a club need other clubs to be just as big and as good as you are, don't you? I would have thought, to give you the sort of competition What I think you don't need is teams coming here when you know you're going to put 30 or 40 points past them, and the result won't be in doubt before the game starts. And we need to get to that point somehow.
And to be fair, I think that the level of competition is getting much closer. So every week, we recently played the Salford team, and those games are very close. And I think each team is actually starting to get to a place where the competition as a whole is more competitive. And how we do that so that every single game is of the intensity of the NRL probably is an important bit about taking our game forward.
It's interesting to bear in mind there are 12 clubs in Super League, and there are 2 major trophies to go for every year: the Challenge Cup and the Grand Final. If all the teams were equal, you would expect to win 1 trophy every 6 years on that basis. And of course, your expectations are far greater than that at this club. But one day, I would love to see every club being as well organised and as well structured and as well financed and so on as Wigan are, and we're going to be waiting quite some time for that, I think. If we could just move on to one final thing that I wanted to ask you about. Obviously, you spent so many years at the RFL as the chief medical officer, and the issue that's come to the fore, you've mentioned it already, is the danger that players suffer head trauma and concussion and so on, and it's become, and we've had all this publicity about former players bringing legal actions and so on. What's your take on that? Do we need to modify the game in some way? I know we have done in a way, haven't we? We're trying to cut down head tackles very seriously, and the RFL have got to be admired for wanting to do that. But are there any other steps we need to take?
So there's been huge progress this year, Martyn, with respect to minimising the contact with the head, and I think that the game really deserves significant credit for how it's grasped the evidence and move forward. And the RFL, Tony Sutton especially, Robert Hicks, they've done a really good job at having as inclusive a debate around that as they possibly could. And then as a consequence, the changes that have been brought in this year within the professional game in terms of the tackle height, that has made a meaningful difference in reducing contact with the head. So that's great. Where we need to pay more attention is the question of player load. And why I say that is that contact with the head, there's always the risk of a player suffering a head trauma that then has a serious effect on the player. However, the question of load, and that load over a period of time, focus and attention on that, I think, is a place that will yield huge dividends in terms of player welfare. And the Rugby Football League and the Brain Health Committee has made some great strides around this in terms of recommendations and now part of the rules of the game around the number of games that players can play from different positions, and that being very much based on evidence as well. So that focus,
and that's going to come in next year, isn't it?
Yes, and using sports science to monitor that, and using that as a catalyst for the overall welfare attention paid to players. I think that's the place that we really can be a leader in this regard, because Rugby Uni, we've mentioned it a couple of times, so they've got a completely different approach to the tackle height. The incidence of concussion in Rugby Union has not reduced one jot.
Because they tend to happen at the breakdown, what they call the breakdown.
Yeah, not one jot in terms of lowering the tackle height. The wider part and the place where we really can pay attention and make a difference and have welfare front and centre is around load and the contact within training, how that is monitored, the appreciation of that, and using evidence to limit the number of games that our top players play.
Do you think we ought to play fewer games anyway? I mean, obviously the league season is 27 games. Then you've got the Challenge Cup, and then you've got the international and representative calendar. Do you think that's too much, Chris?
I think it's important that all of that is taken within the round, Martyn. The players themselves, they want to play.
Oh, of course.
They want to play every single game.
They would, yeah.
You know,
but sometimes you've got to be protected from yourself, haven't you?
You do, and yet that how the players are approaching the preparation for the games in terms of that load and the amount of time they have off at the end of the season, and making sure that is absolutely rigorously adhered to. I think those are important facets that I will be establishing and making sure there's reliability around that before we're then looking at the number of games and things.
But I mean, one of the things that I hate about our sport, not hate, but don't like, is, you know, the loop games where teams are playing other teams too much, which reduces reduces their attraction, you know. And I remember as a kid growing up, when we used to have 30 teams in one league, and we used to have Yorkshire and Lancashire leagues. Wakefield only played, which was my team, Wakefield. We only played Wigan in certain seasons when both teams were roughly on a par with each other. So when Wigan came to town, you know, the whole of Wakefield was there at Bellevue to watch them. And I'm sure it was the same vice versa. But now, you know, we're in danger of playing too many games. I mean, Wigan and St Helens is such a great game, but if you played it every week, it would lose its attraction.
Martyn, you're right, and I think this takes us back to the bit about working with IMG to reimagine the game. So how can we have that standard, which is one which generates excitement, yet also, you know, challenges the players, that level of intensity, exactly the same as there is every week in the NRL. And those are collective conversations that we all need to have, and to make sure that there's sufficient funding around the game to ensure that we can get to that place where every single game matters, and it's underpinned by a standard, which means that the players are absolutely at the peak of their performance.
Yeah.
I guess with the workload restrictions on the players as well, it pays to have a deep squad with a lot of talent coming through the ranks.
Sure. Yeah, and how teams can use their academy structures. And great news, isn't it, that two more academies at Salford and Castleford have now got those licenses.
Absolutely, yes.
And look, that's the bedrock of this club.
Well, the future lies with young people, doesn't it?
So
really?
So without any doubt, Martyn, and you know, giving opportunity for those younger players within a structure whereby they're going to be appropriately looked after, and that then allowing opportunity for other players perhaps to take some downtime, really important. Yeah, underpinned by those players being properly prepared and within a system that takes note of their development.
Absolutely.
And I think that bit about the academy grading, again, is really, really important because it prepares young players for playing at the highest level.
Absolutely.
We touched on Junior Nsemba earlier, what a talent he's going to be, and his ceiling's so high. I'm sure he'll be, you know, feared by all teams going forward.
The only problem is I hope you don't lose him to the NRL, Chris. That would be... I mean, it would, from his point of view, that might happen, but...
he's a sensible lad.
Yeah.
He was brought up across the road.
Yeah.
He's rooted in this club.
Yeah.
And he really enjoys being part of the setup and the development that has underpinned his success. And he's a really nice lad, as well as being a fantastic talent. And what an advert for our game. And, you know, I see young players coming through the academy and take great pleasure in that. Looping back to what I said before, you know, me getting involved in the Great Britain Academy, you know, those teams of 1998 and 99, the number of people, Jake, from those teams who went on to play for Great Britain at the highest level, and some of them now coaching at the highest level as well. It's extraordinary. You know, so Paul Wellens was part of that team.
Yeah.
Paul Deacon, albeit he's with Sale, he was part of that team as well, and others who've gone to, you know, lead the game in different ways, like Gareth Carvell and his role as the Rugby League Players Association, you know, and all of this. I think it just shows how important the academy is, and that being underpinned by standards that have to be met within those facilities, so that those lads are then prepared to play at the highest level.
Awesome.
Right.
Well, mate, we've taken up a heap of your time today. We really appreciate it, and thanks for having us here in your office in Wigan. It's been a great experience, and yeah, I look forward to potentially talking to you again in the future. And our viewers and listeners won't know this, but we've filmed this podcast, I guess, a few weeks ago, so before the Challenge Cup. We don't know whether you've won at Wembley yet, so best of luck for Wembley, mate.
So we'll know the result by the time this podcast is broadcast.
And congratulations if you have won, and commiserations if you haven't, but
well, Jake, all the best. Look, we're great pals with the Warrington setup.
Yeah.
Some of my friends who I've looked after over the years play for Warrington. I hold Sam Burgess in the highest of regard. Carl Fitzpatrick, again, he's a great fellow, and Chris and he are close. And you know, we're very lucky that the boards of the two clubs as well get on very well. So, you know, that's something that, you know, crikey, if we do have to lose, well, the Warrington club, they're a great setup, and we will just take that with dignity.
Great sportsmanship. Great sportsmanship.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to hit subscribe on YouTube. Grab a subscription to League Express at totalrl.com/shop. Thanks again, Chris.
Yeah, well, can I thank Chris in particular for allowing us to come over today, Chris, and meet you here in this wonderful environment at Wigan, and we hope to do it again maybe next year. Who knows?
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Chris.
Cheers then. Thank you very much.